and welcome, dear coffee gamers. My name is David. I am a curator, coffee fanatic, and co-founder of Rabbit Hole Roasters in Delson, Quebec. And
I'm Sophie, also co-founder of Rabbit Hole Roasters, and today David will be your teacher, so I'll leave you guys with him. Bye!
so what will we be talking about today specifically? So we have a huge focus at Rabbit Hole Roasters on emerging origins. So we like to try new origins, new coffee market, and encourage those origins. So we are going literally down the emerging origin rabbit hole today. First of all, what's an emerging origin? So I have a couple of different definitions of what I like to call an emerging origin. So the first and most obvious one is an origin that started to produce specialty coffee very recently. So the best example that I can think of for that is going to be the coffees from Yunnan in China. They haven't been producing coffee for that long, and especially not specialty coffee. Another definition that we could have for emerging origin could be a re-emerging origin. So for example, Yemen the last couple of years has been re-emerging, but it's not an emerging origin in the sense that it's new. It's one of the oldest producing countries in the world, but it kind of went missing for a couple of years now. But now, with the efforts of different import and export company, we can see a resurgence of Yemeni coffee coming back to the market. And the third way that I would define an emerging origin is when you have an emerging that can't really qualify for the first two things that I just mentioned, but sometimes when an origin sits in the shadows of a super famous or well-known origin, then I still qualify it as an emerging origin, kind of. So an example of that would be Ecuador. It's been producing coffee for a while now. I don't think it's an emerging origin that much, but it sits in the shadow of Colombia. So everybody knows that Colombia is producing coffee, but not everybody is aware that Ecuador produces stellar and very, very, very good coffees. So now I'm going to give you a few pointers on how to identify if a coffee comes from an emerging origin or not. But just keep in mind that some of those things that apply maybe a bit more often to emerging origins can apply to literally any origin. And that's why it's sometimes really hard to know where a coffee is coming from. The first thing that you can look at is going to be the ungrounded whole roasted beans. Because in emerging markets, emerging coffee markets, they're gonna have, first of all, less experience. So they're gonna have less experience picking the coffee. The pickers there are gonna be also less experienced, so they can take cherries that are gonna be overripe, unripe. Emerging origin also have a little bit less equipment at first, less ways to process the coffees in a way that might be optimal. Also, sometimes they might not have the luxury to just like throw away all of the defects, so sometimes they can let a couple of defects slide in, and this is gonna often show with the paler beans in the roasted coffee, and also maybe the shapes of the bean is going to vary a little bit more than if you take a very well organized origin like Ethiopia, for example, where when you roast the coffee in general, you're going to have pretty much the same color and the same bean size and same bean quality. So this is what I mean by analyzing the roasted green coffee for emerging origins. On this side, we have coffee from Ethiopia. It's a natural coffee, and you can see that the color specifically is way more uniform than on that side, and the size and the shape of the beans as well. Here we have a natural coffee as well, but from Yunnan this time. The bean shape, the bean size are a little bit different. It's still really, really good, but you can see there's a little bit more defects here, and we call those Quakers, so the color is way different, and it can come from defective beans, unripe or overripe cherries as well. So these are just a few pointers to look out when you're looking for emerging origins. One thing that I like doing to pinpoint if a coffee is from an emerging origin or not is going to be to think about the general profiles of different producing regions. So this is not accurate 100% of the time, not even close, but for me personally, everything from Central America is going to be a little bit rounder, nuttier, with more chocolate notes and a little bit less acidity. When I think of Africa, I think about berries, high acidity, higher elevation coffees. So I will just taste the coffee and see if I can pinpoint where the coffee is coming from in the first place. So let's go to Africa for a second here. So if we take a very famous origin like Ethiopia, those coffees are going to be very sweet, sometimes floral, delicate. The sweetness reminds me of honey a lot. And there's full of berries, so you can name all the berries in the world and it's going to be probably in an Ethiopian coffee at some point. But then go to an emerging origin that's close to Ethiopia. Let's say you go to the Congo or you go to Uganda as well. You can find things that maybe are going to remind you of those Ethiopian coffees with the red berries or the body of the coffee or some flowers, but the acidity might be a little bit different. And the thing that I really focus on is going to be the sweetness of the coffee to see if it comes from a different origin. So if the coffee reminds me of Ethiopia, but it tastes like bitter chocolate, or it would taste like heavy caramel, I might know that I'm in Africa, but maybe I'm not from one of the famous origins. Or if caramel and blackberries is going to be super predominant in Kenyan coffees, and I have a little bit of that, but I also have something that's not quite what I expect from a Kenyan coffee, then I might know that I would be in the vicinity of those countries, but not quite yet. So this is a good pointer on how to find emerging origin. One thing about emerging origin, because of what I said earlier about having a bit less infrastructure, maybe less experienced pickers, you're gonna have sometimes a little bit more defects visually, and this can sometimes transpire in the cup of coffee. So if you have anything that you like, but the aftertaste is going to be a really good pointer of how the processing went. So if you have something that's a little bit too fermenty, but not necessarily in the best of ways, if you have coffees that taste overly tropical, that could also be a small pointer to an emerging origin. One thing that I like to focus on as well when tasting any coffee is to try to figure out what the varietal of the coffee is. One thing that's wildly popular in emerging origins is they will plant varietals that are going to be high yield and disease resistant. So one varietal that I have at the top of my head, and that's planted everywhere in Yunnan, is going to be Katimar. So there's a little bit of Robusta genetics in there to increase with the yield, and also it's disease resistant. So this is very, very good. But when it's not processed the right way and not grown the right way in the right context, it can be a good indicator of an emerging origin, because variety like Katimar that is not really well done can have an aftertaste that's going to be maybe a little bit grassy, maybe it's going to be a little bit less sweet than other origins in general. So trying to pinpoint what the varietal is on a coffee can be also a small indicator of if you are dealing with an emerging producing country. And now the big question, should you cup the coffee or should you brew it? And I think the answer is you just need to do both, because you will get different characteristics depending on the brew method, right? So when you cup the coffee, one thing that is really nice is that it is really hard to mess up the extraction of a cupping bowl, and in fact you can't really. So you're really gonna extract the coffee and extract everything it has to give, everything that's positive about it and everything that's a little bit less nice as well, because you didn't filter anything out. So when I cup the coffee, you're usually going to use a very high ratio, between 17 and 18 to 1. It's going to be kind of a weaker cup, but you're sure to extract everything the coffee has to offer. And if you focus on emerging origins, especially the ones that are really starting or the one with very little infrastructure, you might see a little bit of sometimes woody, maybe a little bit of a greener aftertaste, and this the cupping is going to highlight way better. And then, if you want to focus on how the coffee is going to perform in a cafe environment or just for you when you brew it at home, you know what to expect from the coffee, and now you just want to make a better version of it with the filters, because sometimes the filter is gonna retain some of the least pleasant aspect of a coffee. So I always do both, and whenever possible, I will do them side by side, just like I will do right now. Whenever we talk about emerging origins at Rabbit Hole, we're going to be a little bit biased towards our favorite emerging origin, which is Yunnan in China. And this is a very good example of an emerging origin done right. When we first cupped those coffees 4 harvests ago almost, we liked the coffee a lot, the one that we bought, but there was a lot of different types of coffees that we quite didn't like, especially the naturals. In terms of processing, it was not what we wanted to offer, what we wanted to have on our coffee menu. But fast forward to today, the naturals are very, very good. They're doing honey processes now, and the wash coffee went from about 83 points on a scoring grid to close to 86 points in the last harvest. But that's kind of a huge improvement, due probably to better processing techniques. And one thing that's also really, really great about Yunnan is that they plant almost exclusively Katimar, which is not a very popular varietal amongst coffee drinker, maybe the more geekier one, because they think that the coffee, and rightly so in other origin, is going to be a bit more woody, the aftertaste is not that nice, but the climate in Yunnan is perfect to grow Katimar because it's hot during the day and it's pretty cool during the night as well, which means it takes more time for the cherries to mature and you have a crazy amount of sweetness, and it makes for an excellent cup of coffee. So our favorite, personally, emerging origin has got to be Yunnan. Just brewed and prepared a cupping bowl of coffee from the Weban region in Yunnan, and it's naturally processed. So I'm going to start by cupping the coffees with those beautiful spoons by Umeko, the best spoon there is for coffee cupping. And I have 2 sizes here. So I have the big one and I have the deeper but smaller one. This one really emphasizes body and sweetness for me, and then the one that's bigger but a little bit less deep really emphasizes acidity and the fruity aspect of coffee. So let's dive in. Now a little bit of this one. So the 2 coffees are really different, and it's super interesting. In the cupping bowl, I have a little bit of everything, and I have more tasting notes or more impressions in there. So the people that really like that type of coffee, they can describe it sometimes as a little bit of tea-like, and the people that don't really like it, they might say that it's a little bit herbal or a little bit too green, but I like it regardless. And you can see a lot of different tropical fruits. You can see the sweetness and the overall structure of the body. But then when you come to the cup, everything that could be regarded as maybe not the best in the cupping bowl is become really nice and really round. And this cup here is full of tropical fruits. I've got pomegranate, I've got a little bit of papaya, even pineapple. It's very sweet, honey-like. So always, if you can, cup the coffee side by side with the brewed cup, and I think it's going to help you to identify if the coffee comes from an emerging origin or not. Hey, I hope you had fun learning about emerging origins, and who knows, there might be some in Leaderboard Season 2, who knows. But emerging origins are so important to me because, first of all, they are very different sometimes. They are super tasty, and I encourage you to just look for roasters who are doing work in emerging origins, because it's not only different, but it's also super important that we give access to the specialty market to not just farmers from Brazil, Ethiopia, and Colombia, but to any farmers that wish to pierce in the specialty coffee market. So look for them, enjoy them, and have fun with Leaderboard Season 2.